So what are the typical challenges? Because if you understand, what are the things that auditors might face on a day-to-day basis, right? Then we will look at what can be solutions to it, right? See, today every organization has probably a set of people who are conducting internal audits. This could be, audits that can be aligned with compliance regulations. This can be audits on processes, on technology, right? It could be audits related to standards like ISO, right? Any of this, right? Today, at least from what I have seen, when you start as auditors, right, there is a excessive dependence on checklist, which means typically one of the preparation activities that an auditor does is to create a checklist. What is a checklist? An audit checklist for people who are new to audits is nothing but, in a very simple term, a set of questions that you will typically ask whomever is facing the audit. So it's a preparation exercise. Is it needed? Of course, yes. Because what we must understand is audits are time bound exercises. We typically, let's say you plan an audit from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., you have to stick to that time. And whatever you have to question, whatever evidences you have to collect, it has to be within that time. So which means you need set of things to be prepared, especially what you want to question them on. But if you're just dependent on the checklist, what's going to happen is you may miss out important points which the auditee is trying to explain. And I can tell you that there is no checklist in the world which can cover everything that you want to ask or verify during the audit. Auditees will always throw you surprises with their answers, right? So that's a common problem, right? Second, again, a common, let's say, feedback that comes around ineffective auditors is, a lot of times when I have led audit teams and I have had a group of auditors, whenever we go and ask for a feedback, a common feedback that comes is they don't seem to understand, what context we work. They don't seem to understand our project at all. Okay, so when you have a limited business context, what happens is your questions will be out of place. Okay, today one of the most trending certifications around audits are two things. One is ISO 42001 lead auditor, which is for AI systems, and another is the advanced in AI audits. Why? Because today the most happening technology within organizations is adoption of AI. Okay, while the business is heavily investing on AI technology, because that seems to be the future, right? That is the future. There are also a lot of questions around whether these AI systems are safe, reliable, how do we manage them, right? How do we ensure we get the right outputs? How do we interpret outputs from these systems? So, which means as an auditor, you also have to constantly upgrade yourself to changing technologies and what are the associated risks with those technologies. Okay, so that's going to be another challenge, right? And this is a very, very, let's say, practical issue that once you become a full-fledged auditor, I have worked for organizations where there are, let's say, 100,000 projects running, and we are an internal audit team of 50 people. So 50 versus 100,000 projects is a big number. So which means in a day, we may have to do 3 audits back to back. So now as an auditor, you are under pressure to complete the audit. Suppose, let's say, you are not a very big organization also, you may always have a timeline. See, a lot of times, this is even common with senior management, that they think audits can be done in 2 days and a report can come out by end of the second day. But unfortunately, audits should never happen that way. There is a life cycle for audits, and if as an auditor you are not given that time, what can happen is you can complete the audit within the specified time and produce a report, but will that report add value, can become a big question mark. Okay, so these are some practical challenges, right? Some of the places where we typically fail in audits is we are so focused on collecting evidences, right? But somewhere we don't articulate what is the issue and what is the business impact. Okay? If an audit has to add value, it should tell the respective businesses what is missing. See, a lot of times when we come out with the outcomes of an audit, and let's say we have 3 risks and 3 observations, right? A lot of time, project teams come back and tell us, business teams and projects teams could come back and tell us that we already know all of this. If you get a statement like that, it means you failed as an auditor. So you can't tell them what they know. You have to, the very reason why you bring audits is, can you figure out something that we have not identified and something which has an impact to that business? A lot of times we also get a feedback when we complete an audit and present the report that, hey, this is not a big thing for us at all. This is not a high risk for us. So we are not going to take any action on this. So how do we challenge that? Okay, so these are some common areas of failure. Okay, today, at least when I talk to a lot of teams, right, the general perception is that if you know about, if you have a knowledge of controls, especially technical controls, okay, so then you can do an audit successfully. Okay, but it is not just about controls. It's about, as an auditor, can you make a judgment on the controls? I'll give you a very simple example, right? One of the basic controls that we have to check, especially when you audit any system, right? IT system is access management. You know, whether access are given to the right people, or access getting reviewed or not, who has access, how are access removed. This is a bare minimum control. So if you are as a typical auditor going to go and check, maybe, you know, if they have Microsoft Active Directory, which is one of the repositories for access control, you ask the respective project team to open it and show you. You just run through a couple of rows and say that you come to a conclusion that, okay, access management is in place, right? That is a mindset of, okay, I have to check this control. I have verified the respective tool. I don't seem to find any problem, so everything is fine. Now, is this one of the ways to do audit? Can you say that the audit is completed? Yes. But again, the question is, will this audit have an impact? May not. Okay. So now you actually have to get into the mindset of investigation. Like, okay, I see a Active Directory. I see a list of users who have been given access, but what can go wrong? Okay, what if something fails? What will be the consequence? Okay, so which means today 99% of the organizations have all controls set up. So you are not going to find a case where controls are not in place. But when I have to become an high impact auditor, the question is, what can fail in this control? Okay, what could go wrong? So which means, see, this is not something that you can think in that 2 hours alone. Because if you're given a 2 hour audit to validate a set of things, right, you may have multiple questions to ask, multiple evidences to verify. Okay, and each of this is time consuming. So you have to start thinking even before you go to an audit. Okay, if your preparation is very good, then the impact that you can create during the audit will make a lot of sense. Okay, so where do auditors typically go wrong? I have brought in 2 or 3 common mistakes, and I've also brought in, some case studies as to what can really happen on the ground, right? One of the most common mistakes that we see is, see, audit is a sampling exercise. Why do we call it sampling? Because as I've been mentioning, there is a time limit for audit. If you plan an audit for 2 hours, whether you like it or not, the team that is undergoing the audit, they are not going to give you more than a minute. If you have to end the audit at 1 p.m., you can probably request an extension of 5 minutes, nothing more than that. So, in that 2 hours, what is it that you're going to sample? See, a lot of times I have seen this practically happening, that teams assuming them to be very smart. So let's take an example. Suppose you want to look at what have been the changes that have happened to a system in the last 1 year. So let's say you look at the change tracker and there are around 30 different changes, right? It could be a functional change, it could be a technical change, it can be a security patch, whatever it is, right? So ideally, it is always the auditor who picks what they want to verify during the audit. But there are times where auditees who are very smart, they can pick 1 or 2 samples which are very good, and they can send it to you saying that, hey, these are 2 change records that we want to showcase during the audit. Okay, now if you are going to blindly accept it, it means you lose a chance of actually verifying what is happening on the ground. Okay, you assume that if these 2 samples are fine, then everything is fine. But what is the risk in that? There can always be exceptions beyond the sampled population. Okay, for example, see, one of the critical areas in access management, we call it privileged access. What's the difference between a normal access and a privileged access? As a normal access, you could typically view systems, right? But if you have a privileged access, you can modify, edit, sometimes even delete. So if you are trying to, let's say, review privileged access, you're trying to take some samples, but in that samples, you are not considering contractors at all. You're only considering permanent employees. Because either that is what was shown to you, or let's say that is what you picked. So now, as an auditor, what am I supposed to do here? Of course, I will look at the existing population, but one of the questions that I should have the mind to ask is, hey, what I see here in this privileged access group are all permanent employees. By any chance, do you give privileged access to any of your contractors or third party also? It is enough if you raise this question. Okay. See, because a lot of times when you sample, the sampling is not completely in the auditor's control, right? It also depends on, we are dependent on the project teams to show us the list of samples, and they may play around it. But when you ask this, my job is done. See, if they say yes, we also share privileged access to few other people, now I have a chance to dig deeper. If they say no, right? Now it's not my fault. I have verified and they have said no. I can put that as a note. Okay, and tomorrow if there is a problem, right? Now as an auditor, I will not take blame because I asked them and they told me no. Okay, but if you don't ask, then it becomes a problem. Okay, so what kind of population do you sample becomes one of the very important factors, right? Second, at least what I am seeing is, see, I come from a generation of auditors where all our audits have been in person. I have traveled across cities to do audits, and I've always insisted that I should sit face to face with the auditee. Okay, and it has done me only tons of good things. Okay, because I know how the auditee is reacting. If they are searching for something on their laptop, I get to see it. So there is very, very less chance of hiding things from me. Okay, and even if they do, it becomes very deliberate. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic that the world has to go through, today a lot of audits happen remotely. And sometimes I have even seen to an extent where you don't get a chance to talk to the other person at all. You send a list of questions and they share relevant evidences for it. Predominantly, for a lot of them, they give you a screenshot. Okay, a screenshot may give you certain information, right? See, today if that is the way organizations operate, you cannot see, there is a limit to which you can push them, but beyond that you also have to become a little accommodative, right? So if they tell you that this is what we can share, what am I supposed to do now? I can probably go back and push them a little, but I don't have a, let's say, the ability to push them too much. Then what do I do? The only thing that I am supposed to do is not rely only on the screenshot. I accept it, right? But I may have to go and dig a little deeper. Do you, first of all, are you as an auditor able to interpret from the screenshot what is missing? See, this is one of the common traits of a good auditor, right? Let's, by default we have to assume that the project teams are going to show us only what they want us to see. There is no team which is going to come and tell the auditor that, hey, I have a problem here, right? They are only going to present their best case. So as an auditor, how do I look beyond that? What are the questions that I'm going to raise? Right, that is where you start differentiating yourself. If you're just going to depend on the screenshot, it may not give you a lot of unknown information, right? Third, see, whenever you are validating a process, let's say any technical systems, right, you cannot stop with just one instance of execution. Like for example, you see a review report, right? This review report is as of, let's say, May 2026. Perfect. You asked for a report, they gave you a report. But one of the default questions that you must ask is, see, we are always supposed to validate in audits the consistency of operations. One instance may look good, but a couple of instances may not. That is why some of you, if you're familiar with SOC audits, there are two types of reports, type 1 report and type 2 report. Type 1 report is for a specific time period. So let's say June 2026. How were the controls designed? You will be validated. But type 2 report is not for one specific period, it's over a period of time. Let's say 6 months to 1 year. Because only if you validate the control frequency, what will happen is you will really get to know whether these people are maintaining controls, and very importantly, is the control also behaving consistently or not? Okay, so these are some common mistakes that we do as auditors, right? Now, what I also want to tell you is, probably some of you could just be starting with audits or would want to transition into audits. What I want to tell you is, it is not that, there are challenges only with junior auditors, or let's say people who are starting on audits. Even with senior most auditors, there are challenges, right? Especially if you are in this group having a considerable years of experience in audits, right? What happens a lot of times is we become too familiar with our environment, right? And we start trusting people. See, if let's say you've been auditing the same project or the same business unit for the past 5 years, naturally you develop a relationship. And if the team has been relatively doing well in audits for the past 3 years, whatever they send, you may accept or believe that it's fine. Okay? And you are used to a certain template and you expect the same. So, which means your criticality in judgment and your investigation powers go down. Right? So, this is why usually what happens in a lot of what I have done with my teams and what I have seen in my ex organizations is, we always rotate auditors. We don't make the same person go and audit the same team again and again and again, because familiarity can bring in a sense of complacency, right? So there are also problems with senior auditors. Okay, so let's take a case study of backup, right? Backup and recovery is one of the an important control within an organization, especially keeping the business continuity planning and disaster recovery in picture. So this is a large healthcare organization which is managing critical patient data, and the audit area here is backup management and recovery validation, right? So what did the audit team verify? They verified backup policy. It is approved. It is documented and approved. They have seen the screenshots of daily backup. They have seen a backup dashboard which says the status, and the status is successful. They have seen the retention settings configured in the backup tool. They've also verified the disaster. DR is disaster recovery procedure, right? Which means in case the system goes down and you have to recover the system along with the data, what is the procedure for it? Is it available or not? With these 5 things, the auditor comes to a conclusion that the backup controls are very effective. Okay, so this is the context. Now, what was missed? What you have verified is production database servers and application servers. But what you could have missed are probably there can be newly deployed servers. Maybe you're only looking at application, but you're not looking at interfaces. And very, very important, you never know. There can be certain areas by default the organization could have excluded from backup itself. So unless you ask for exclusions, people are not going to give information upfront, which means there can be a case where there could be backup, there could be systems which were never included in the backup schedule. I'm not saying this will happen always, but this could happen. And it becomes important for us to always look for exceptions, exclusions. Right? One. Second, you have looked at screenshots, you have looked at emails, but you have actually not validated things on the ground. Starting with, what is the integrity of the backup files? Okay, are there any failed backup logs? Right? So there can always be a reality that the backup job status may say complete, but the actual backup images or files could be corrupted. So we need to dig a little more deeper because screenshots may not present as the right picture always. Okay, and the organization says that we do a quarterly restoration testing and you have verified one restoration document. Okay, but you fail to verify whether is this happening consistently across every quarter. Very, very important. See, what is restoration? The whole point of taking a backup is in case there is a need for people that they have lost data in their primary tool, right? They may have to take a backup, right? They may have to restore data from the backup, but unless you test it, you will not know the integrity of your backup files. So what was the scope of the restoration testing? Were all critical systems tested? So maybe at a later point of time, you identified that it has been 11 months since the last restoration exercise. So that becomes one of the biggest risks. Okay. Another example. See, today one of the strongest controls that you may have to validate is database encryption, right? Because we expect that any sensitive data is encrypted at rest and during transmission. So you are, as an auditor, you are validating, right? How does this encryption happen? What is the effectiveness of the control? So you've looked at the encryption policy document. You've looked at a screenshot which says encryption is enabled. You have looked at an architecture diagram where transport layer security is used. And you have also looked at a vendor compliance certificate. Okay, so these are the evidences provided. Okay. Now, what auditors usually accept? Usually, what auditors look for is whether there are settings for encryption, whether the configuration is enabled, and do you have relevant policies documented. Now, with this, most of the times we come to a conclusion that the control is effective, right? But what else can you look for? Again, you can look for coverage, right? Which are the databases which have been covered? Very, very important. Are backup repositories also encrypted? Okay. Are temporary storage locations excluded? Which means between your primary database and backup database, there can be, in the process of operations, certain temporary storage locations where you could be storing data. Are they included or excluded from your encryption? And there, especially if you are working for, let's say, banking or financial organizations, you may have a lot of legacy systems which could store sensitive customer data. But because of the nature of the system, sometimes you cannot even apply encryption there. It may not support encryption. So are there any such systems where can these controls be applied or are they getting excluded? Right? This is in terms of scope. Okay. Today, if an organization says that they are using encryption, you cannot just stop with an encryption policy or what is the encryption algorithm that they are using. Without validating encryption keys, your audit is incomplete because key, some of you, if you're familiar with encryption, right? What is encryption? Converting a standard text, a readable text, into an unreadable format. And encryption has two components. One is the algorithm, which is the logic, and another is the key, which is a software code, and it's the combination of algorithm and key that you use for encryption. So anybody who gets hold of the key can actually decode or decrypt that data. So how are the keys managed, right? Where are the keys stored? How secured are these keys? Without validating this, your audit is incomplete. Okay. Now, okay, you can define a policy, you can have the best of algorithms and keys, but what is happening on the ground? Like, is encryption by default or optional? Right? What are the kind of these cipher suits are nothing but what are the kind of algorithms and versions permitted? See, when you have an older version, what it means is even though you are doing encryption, the process may not be effective. Okay, so that can cause a lot of challenge or problem within the organization. And what are the risks? So you know the process. Let's say you've got to know what is the algorithm, how are keys managed, everything. But what are the risks in this process? Like, can privileged users bypass is there a chance to bypass encryption? Right? After decrypting, right, where are the results stored? And have there been any failures in encryption in the last, let's say, few months or in the last 1 year? So what happens is, from the time what is being shown to the questions that you dig deeper at every level, you are enhancing your capability as an auditor, and most importantly, whether the teams like it or not, you are actually helping them, right? Because you are with every question of yours like this, you are making them think. Sometimes they may accept it openly, sometimes they go back and work, but it's very important for us to pass on this message. Okay. Now, I always say this, that preparation for an audit is 20%. Conducting the audit, making use of that 2 to 3 hours is, let's say, 50%. But coming out with the correct finding, that is reporting the audit outcome, is where you reflect as an auditor. Because how much ever you prepare and you do a very strong audit, if you are not able to convert it into a strong finding, right, all your effort does not get reflected. At the end of the day, people read your finding. When I say people, I'm especially talking about senior management, right? It's always that a lot of times you may have to audit with people on the ground, but you may have to present the outcome of the audit to senior management. So here is a very good example of how do you present a finding, right? See, one of the things that you must tell them is, what have you seen? There were a total number of incidents, out of which there were so many. This is just an example. There were so many for which there was an SLA breach. And in this, there are so many cases where there was certain issue. So now what happens is, you give them a context. You are telling them that I have not come to this conclusion just by looking at one incident. Right? I am telling you, I am recording the period that I have verified for. And I am telling you what is happening. And very, very important. See, if suppose, let's say you have only this without the business impact, the default question that the management is going to throw back at the auditor is, okay, we understand all that you say. What big deal? What is going to happen? Tell us that. Because at the end of the day, when you present an audit report to senior management, you have to talk to them in their language. If you cannot bring in a business context to your finding, your entire finding will get negated. So you have to bring in a business impact. Just for your understanding, I've given you a couple of impacts. So it's not that every time you have to give 4 impacts. No. Even if you can give one impact, right, in terms of how is it going to affect the business, that is where they take notice and they become serious about your findings. See, what should be the outcome of an audit? The outcome of an audit is people respect that, there has been an effort to help us, and they have to take action on the findings. That will happen only when you bring in a business impact. Okay, so the whole point of this discussion is that how do we become that, let's say, this top 10% auditors, especially high impact auditors. One is we start managing our emotions, and we start looking at audits from a value addition perspective, like what can be good for the other team. We start challenging, the existing process setup, the existing controls, but at the same time become professionals. In the sense, we are challenging, but it should never appear that we're trying to put them down. And this is going to be the real game changer for you. Like, how do we learn to ask for better evidences and do not get satisfied with what is being shown to us? We become risk advisors, right, and not just completing a putting a tick mark against our checklist and say that, hey, I've completed all the questions that I'm supposed to ask. Okay, when we start consciously moving around this direction, what happens is that the most important thing is we grow a lot. I have seen this happening within me, and I'm sure anybody who's in this journey will also see this. Okay. Now, what are the skill sets needed today for a high impact auditor, right? See, you need to get familiar with the technology that is coming in or that is existing, right? 10 years back, it was digital, right? Cloud platforms, SaaS systems. Today, it is AI. So, you don't have to be an expert, right? For instance, you don't have to understand an API flow, but you should at least know what APIs are and what are they being used for. The same thing is happening today with AI, right? What is an AI model? What will an AI algorithm contain? What do we mean by generative AI? What can be challenges when a developer is developing AI? You need to know that. One. Second, business and operational processes. Why? Because, see, technically, maybe some of you, if you come from a technical background, technically you may be very sound. But at the end of the day, if you're validating a control, we have just seen you have to associate it to a business impact. So you need to know the business flows. You need to understand who are the stakeholders. Are there any suppliers? Can there be any regulatory impact? Are there any regulations in this context? Without that, when you come up with an outcome, it can be out of place. Okay, and extremely important is soft skills, right? When we say professional skepticism, we are always in a way of identifying what could go wrong, right? Not accepting everything that is shown to us. Communication, you are going to have pushbacks, right? This is the core human nature. No auditor is going to be welcomed when they highlight a risk or a non-conformity or an observation. So how do you handle that pushback? Okay, and get into an investigation mode And last but not least, the ability to make judgments, right? See, a lot of times what happens is, in the process of auditing, we spend a lot of time in unnecessary things, validating unwanted things, right? And we lose our judgment, right? Sometimes we have to make a decision and move on. Okay, so it has to be a combination of technical, business, and soft skills. Okay, and how do you build your career around it, right? I've just given an overview in terms of understanding the fundamentals of audit, right? You can start with IT general controls or ISO 27001, right? And then becoming technically strong, going a little more deeper into technical aspects, right? Then starting to develop, business perspectives, and ultimately you start thinking from a enterprise level and look at strategic risks, right? Each of these, they require its own set of technical and professional skills. It comes as you get exposed, as you also do a self enablement, you also spend a lot of time conducting audits. Okay, last but not least, we are coming up with a full-fledged GRC IT audit practical approach training. This is going to be a 40-hour course. This is planned to start from June 13th. It will be a weekend evening course, which is 7 to 11 p.m. India time. Okay, so what we are trying to cover there is end-to-end audit life cycle, right? We're going to cover all core controls, right? We are also bringing in the alignment with all popular frameworks like ISO 27001, SOC 2. We're going to do the entire audit life cycle, starting from how do you prepare for audits, how do you conduct audits, right? How do you validate evidences, and very importantly, how do you report? Now, this is not going to be a theory course. We will bring in certain theory, but we are specifically focusing it on hands-on exercises, right? It will be case study driven. As a group, you will be given artifacts on which you will conduct audit, identify, report findings. So every single control, we will take it in depth. That is why we are doing it over 40 hours. Okay, and we are really looking for people even with auditing experience, because you will get a practical exposure. Even if you are, let's say, ISO 27001 or CISA certified, I'm sure you will agree that the amount of time that you would have spent in practically handling audits will be very less, because each of these courses, they come up with their own course heavy, content heavy material. So I do a lot of ISO audits, right? So it becomes ISO trainings also. So for us to spend dedicated time in auditing is very less there. That is why this is a customized course from InfosecTrain, right? So please go back and evaluate. And if you think it's a right fit for you, please do join us on this training.